My mother's beauty was unparalleled. People used to call her the most beautiful woman in the world. When she turned 16, stories of her beauty spread far and wide. My grandmother protected her daughter from the world as if she were hiding gold from thieves. My mother's name was Syra. Whoever saw her angelic face became enchanted. At the age of 10, she was put behind a veil, completely forbidden from stepping outside. Whenever women from the neighborhood visited, my grandmother would signal my mother to go inside. She had no choice but to obey. She was only allowed to attend school until the 5th grade. After that, she was confined to the house. This confinement made my mother deeply unhappy. Other girls had friends, companions with whom they could share their hearts, but my mother had no such luxury. For her, friendship was just a distant dream. At that tender age, girls have countless dreams, but my mother never even knew what hers were. She wasn't even allowed to look in a mirror lest she become vain. My grandmother removed all mirrors from the house. Because of this extreme caution, my poor mother fell into deep mental distress. She started talking to herself, sometimes remaining silent for days as if she had lost the ability to speak. My grandmother became increasingly worried and confided in my grandfather. "I don't know what's happening to my delicate, flower-like daughter. She talks to herself in her room, sometimes laughing, sometimes frowning. She gets restless in the closed rooms and goes to sit by the flower beds. She even talks to the plants and flowers." The truth was, my mother had become a victim of severe loneliness, but my grandmother failed to understand this. She was a simple woman of the old ways, terrified of the changing times and their new customs. When the jasmine plant in our home bloomed with white flowers, my mother would go crazy with their fragrance. She would pick the flowers, weave them together, and sometimes make garlands to wear around her neck. My grandmother disapproved, saying, "Unmarried girls shouldn't wear flower garlands, especially in the evening." But my mother would just laugh. One day when my grandmother strictly forbade her, she took the garland she had made for herself and put it around the neck of her pet cat. And then something strange happened. According to my grandmother, the cat, whom she already considered unlucky, started behaving strangely after the jasmine garland was placed around its neck. It began to sway and play with the garland as if possessed by a spirit. It kept shaking its head, rolling restlessly on the floor, intoxicated by the fragrance. It sniffed the flowers with the same delight as humans do when they enjoy a pleasant scent. My grandmother was stunned, but my mother burst into uncontrollable laughter. At that moment, my grandmother grabbed her by the arm and dragged her inside. She resisted as if her feet were glued to the ground. Frustrated, my grandmother called my Aunt Asia for help. Together, they pulled my mother inside. My grandparents had only 2 daughters, Asia and Syra, my mother. My Aunt Asia was dark-skinned and beautiful in her own way, but she wasn't as delicate and breathtakingly stunning as my mother, whose beauty seemed almost unreal. No one was allowed inside our home, nor was my mother permitted to step out. After the incident with the cat, my mother found a new escape from her loneliness. While my grandmother and Aunt Asia were busy in the kitchen, she would sit in the flower beds, holding her pet cat, weaving garlands. My grandmother would scold her, but she would reply, "Ami, I'm not making these for myself. They're for my Mano. She loves their fragrance." As my mother became more engrossed in the flowers, the cat, and the sweet-smelling garlands, my grandmother's concern grew. Eventually, her fear escalated to the point where she pressured my grandfather to sell the house. "This girl will never stop. What if she falls under the influence of spirits and brings new trouble upon us? If we move to another house, we'll leave behind the jasmine, the mongrel flowers, their intoxicating scent, and even this cursed cat. Only then will my Syra break free from this enchantment and start taking interest in household matters. Right now, Asia is handling all the responsibilities, but once she gets married, how will I manage everything alone? Syra should learn kitchen work too," my grandmother would often say. "Even a weak drop of water, if it keeps falling on stone, can carve a hole through it." My grandmother, after all, was a wife, and there is great power in a wife's advice. My poor grandfather had no choice but to give in. He sold their ancestral home for a meager price and bought a modest house in an unfamiliar neighborhood. This new house was nothing grand, just a small 2-room dwelling. It was barely livable. The courtyard was paved. There were no flower beds, no plants. Only one jasmine vine grew near the gate, clinging to the wall, forming a canopy over the roof. In bloom, it would cover itself with tiny white flowers, filling the air with fragrance. The delicate buds would fall into the courtyard like scattered stars, creating a mesmerizing sight. When my grandfather purchased the house, it was autumn. There were no flowers, only a pile of yellow leaves gathered around the vine's dry, ash-colored trunk. No one paid attention to the fact that as the vine reached the roof, its branches formed a lush green canopy, which, when spring arrived, would become a treasure trove of fragrant blossoms. As the season changed, a shower of jasmine flowers began filling the courtyard. Their intoxicating scent spread through the air, so much so that even the stone walls and floors of the new home seemed to absorb the fragrance. Moving into this new house made Syra uneasy. Gone were the beloved flower beds, and worst of all, her pet cat, Mano, was left behind in the old house. The thought of Mano searching for her, restlessly waiting for her, brought tears to her eyes. When spring arrived and the jasmine flowers began to bloom, my grandmother became anxious once again. After all, it was this very fragrance that had driven her to sell their grand home and move to an unknown neighborhood. Meanwhile, my Aunt Asia's wedding was finalized, and she was soon married off. Now, Syra was completely alone. The new house felt suffocating. She couldn't adjust. Whenever she felt overwhelmed, she would climb up the stairs to the roof, peering over the edge to observe the streets and alleyways. She had to find some way to pass the time. Every evening, just before sunset, the stifling atmosphere of the house would become unbearable for her. She couldn't stand being downstairs for even a moment and would rush up to the rooftop. At least up there, she could see the open sky. The cool evening breeze would ease the suffocation she felt inside. And then there was the jasmine vine. Its fresh green leaves, covered in clusters of white flowers, filled the air with their sweet scent. Standing beside it, Syra would gently hold a branch and breathe in the fragrance, as if trying to absorb it deep into her soul. If she was out of sight for too long, my grandmother would panic. "Syra, oh Syra, where have you gone? Where do you keep disappearing to? And at this hour, Ya Allah, how do I make this girl understand? You don't go to the rooftop at sunset, but no, she bathes, leaves her hair open, and clings to that jasmine vine. Allah knows why she's so obsessed with its fragrance." But my mother couldn't help herself. How long can a 16 or 17-year-old girl endure the suffocation of four walls? Even stepping onto the rooftop for a few moments of fresh air had become a crime. This constant tension created friction between mother and daughter. Sarah protested, "Ami, you don't let me go anywhere. Now you won't even let me stand on the rooftop. Do you want me to live like a prisoner, locked in a room, suffocating until I die? What's on the roof that bothers you so much?" My grandmother replied sternly, "There's a huge jasmine vine up there, covered with thousands of fragrant flowers. And you stand there every evening at sunset, leaning against it. Why must you do this? You could go up during the day." Syra sighed, "But during the day the sun is too harsh on me. Ants crawl along the walls, climbing onto my arms, my clothes. In the evening the ants return to their nests and the heat fades away. The air feels fresh and soothing. That's why one feels like going in the evening." "Let it be, you silly girl," Nani said. "We haven't turned our hair white under the sun for nothing. Evening belongs to otherworldly creatures. The fragrant vines and plants attract them, and their pull is such that a person is drawn to them unconsciously. So don't go up there every evening with your hair flowing down your back. If some spirit or ghost clings to you, you'll be stuck there forever." Syra had grown tired of these ghostly tales. They had made her life miserable. My mother's life had become unbearable because of them. When my mother refused to stop going to the rooftop, Nani became convinced that some invisible creature had possessed her daughter. She started insisting again, "Husband, sell this house. The jasmine tree is cursed anyway. It is a known fact that spirits and ghosts reside in such trees. The cats are always climbing its vine." Nana, exasperated, replied, "Wife, selling a house every other day and buying a new one is not child's play. This is sheer foolishness. You don't change neighborhoods so frequently. Constantly shifting homes takes away blessings. This is not an easy task, and I won't do it this time. Our daughter is perfectly fine. She doesn't have fits, nor is she sick. She only goes to the rooftop for some fresh air when she feels suffocated by solitude. If you are so worried, then accompany her." When her husband gave such a firm response, Nani's watchfulness increased. Every time my mother went to the rooftop, Nani would quietly follow. She would drag her daughter downstairs after sunset. A few days later, she started feeling that something was indeed present on the jasmine vine. Soon she even began seeing a shadow moving about on the rooftop. She became terrified, but Syra neither saw anything nor felt afraid. She would laugh off her mother's concerns, saying, "It's just your imagination, nothing else." One day, Nani saw a man in the neighboring house, which had been abandoned and empty for years. He was grotesque, dark, and terrifying, almost like a ghost. The moment she saw him, she let out a shriek and fainted on the spot. Syra sprinkled water on her face and somehow managed to bring her downstairs. Nani swore by everything she held dear. "I saw a ghost-like creature in the window of the house next door. No human could stay conscious after seeing it." But Sarah dismissed her claims, saying, "I go to the rooftop every day, and I have never seen any human being in that abandoned house. This so-called ghost is just your imagination playing tricks on you, Amy." Nana had no solution to this issue, so he decided that the best course of action was to get his daughter married as soon as possible. No flute, no music. Within a month, he arranged Syra's marriage to a relative. Just as my mother was beautiful, her groom was equally handsome. And exactly 9 months after their wedding, I was born into this world. Everyone was convinced that the child of such gorgeous parents would be even more stunning, radiant like the sun and the moon. But when I was born, they were so shocked that they bit their fingers in disbelief. I was extremely dark-skinned. Since newborns don't have distinct features right away, I was just a lump of flesh, and my skin was pitch black. Looking at me, it seemed as if I were a living mass of dark-colored meat. No one was ready to believe that I was truly my parents' child. The midwife was so horrified by my appearance that she let out a scream and collapsed onto the side. She said, "I have never seen a baby like this in my life. This is not a human child. She looks like a black ghost." Everyone rebuked her, saying, "Midwife, watch your mouth. Think before you speak." But she insisted, "Am I saying anything wrong? Just look for yourselves. Take my advice. Abandon her somewhere. She is a demon child. She will grow up and devour you all." My grandmother, a kind and pious woman, immediately slapped the midwife and said, "Heartless woman, how dare you say such things about an innocent baby? Do you not have a heart? Get out of here at once." Grandmother instructed everyone that, no matter what, I was a creation of Allah and should be accepted as his blessing. The midwife, after receiving a slap, left the house and did not return the next day. When we inquired about her, we learned that as soon as she lay down on her cot at home, her soul departed from this world. Only Allah knows if that was her destined moment of death. But after that, even stranger things began happening. Despite everything, my upbringing was normal thanks to grandmother's affection. Grandmother's goat produced milk, and since my mother's milk had dried up, I was raised on goat's milk. But Allah is the ultimate provider. He blessed the goat's milk, and instead of 2 liters, it started producing 4 liters daily. 2 liters in the morning and 2 in the evening, which was enough to feed a baby. Time passed, and I grew up. My mother never had another child. When I was 6 years old, she fell ill and passed away. Nani only saw me once and never visited me again. She would say, "This is not a human child. She is the offspring of the jinn. She looks like the same ghostly figure I saw in the abandoned house's window, the one that terrified me and made me faint." He lived on the jasmine vine, which is why my daughter used to go up there. People dismissed Nani's words, calling her superstitious and old-fashioned. I was unfortunate. I never received the love of my Nana and Nani, and I lost my mother at a young age. But whatever memories she left me were filled only with love. Before my wedding, my father also passed away. The only person left was my Aunt Asia. She was happy in her own home. When we occasionally met, she would tell me, "Your mother was so beautiful that Ami put many restrictions on her." My sister used to cry because of them. I remember she would often pray, "Oh Allah, do not give me a beautiful daughter like myself. Instead, give me a daughter as dark as night, so that she never has to suffer like I did. Let her walk freely in the open air and breathe in its fragrance." I remember my mother saying, "You may not be beautiful, but I feel peace knowing that my prayer has been answered. Now I do not have to fear evil eyes. My daughter will live as freely as she wishes, and I will not have to hide her behind 7 veils." She also used to say, "My dearest Maliha, you are my fragrant black rose. Just wait and see. Allah will bless my daughter with immense happiness, and she will never be alone. But I saw no such blessings in my life. If only my mother had been alive, I wouldn't have suffered so much. By then I was 16 years old. Grandmother had also passed away. After her death, Aunt Asia took me into her home because I had no one else to turn to. However, my dark complexion was severely disliked by her in-laws. At 16, my features had become sharp, exactly like my mother's. But my skin was pitch black, so dark that it gleamed under the sun. Aunt's father-in-law treated me horribly. He would call me, "Hey, you girl," as if saying my name was beneath him. I had no place in that house except as a servant. Misfortune had already marked my existence, and on top of that, ugliness had also stained me. But this was no ordinary lack of beauty. People called me the daughter of a ghost. When Aunt Asia was angry with her father-in-law, he would retort, "With a face like that, what kind of treatment do you expect? Should we embrace and pamper her? She is the daughter of a ghost. Of course, we will despise her." Regardless of my appearance, I was still human. The insults, scorn, and constant rebukes had left my heart wounded. I had no home of my own. Otherwise, I would have left long ago. Despite everything, since I had entered their house, fortune had begun showering upon them. Wealth poured in from all directions. People whispered that I was a lucky charm and that my presence had brought prosperity. During that time, a proposal came for Aunt Asia's daughter. Aunt's mother-in-law strictly ordered, "The ghostly girl must not appear before the guests, or they will change their minds." Coincidentally, when the guests arrived, I was standing in the veranda. The groom was handsome, but his elder brother, he was like a second Yusuf, even more beautiful. Forgetting my aunt's mother-in-law's instructions, I kept staring at him, mesmerized. His name was Gulfam. Seeing me so lost in wonder, he said, "Girl, have you lost your mind? Go and bring some cold water." Startled, I hurried to the kitchen. When I brought him the water, my hands trembled under the weight of his beauty. He noticed my condition, suddenly laughed, and looked closely at my face. Then with a strange softness, he said, "Black Rose." Hearing these words from his mouth, I was stunned. Both families agreed to the marriage. But after the agreement, Gulfam made a shocking statement that left everyone in disbelief. He said, "I want to marry this Black Rose." When I heard this, I nearly fainted. Aunt Asia was overjoyed, but her mother-in-law was furious. However, Gulfam firmly stated, "If you give me the Black Rose's hand in marriage, only then will my younger brother marry your daughter. Otherwise, we will leave." And so, the fate of this unfortunate, dark-skinned girl was sealed. Perhaps it was my mother's prayers, the ones I had heard in my childhood, that made this miracle happen. I became the bride of this beautiful princely Gulfam. My aunt's daughter, Nita, also got married to Gulfam's younger brother. Today, I reign over my Gulfam's heart. After our marriage, he was blessed with such prosperity that he now swims in wealth, and I am bathed in gold. Allah's justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. All miracles are in his hands alone. He is the most powerful, the one who shapes destinies, the most merciful Lord. Only he is worthy of worship. Everything else will perish.